All right, welcome to Storytelling Hour, everybody. I'm really excited to be here, and I want to start off by having you think about your favorite storytelling experiences in your life, the moments that you've just treasured, whether it was in kindergarten or in the library or on your grandpa's lap or your uncle who held everyone wrapped at the dinner table. I personally think of when I was little, my mom read me stories every night before I went to bed. And I'd get so sleepy and I'd want to close my eyes, and I was scared that if I stopped and closed my eyes that she would stop reading. So I'd close my eyes and I'd say, I'm still listening, keep going. And isn't that wonderful about stories? So think about the story experiences that you've loved. Who was telling them to you? Or who are you telling them to? How did they make you feel? Think of that comfort, that safeness, that connectedness that they made you feel. And that's what I love so much about stories, is they help us understand our place in the universe. They're clear experiences that have a beginning, middle, and end, that pull us in, that make us feel safe, and that make us feel connected to one another. But today I'm not talking to you about those nice stories. I want to talk to you about the stories that we're scared to share. So take a moment and think about the story that you're scared to share. The story that you've experienced, that you keep hidden inside you, that you stuff down because of fear, because of vulnerability, because of shame. Think about those stories that live within you that you don't tell anyone. And it's those stories that I want to focus on today, because I believe that when we share those stories, they can have the biggest impact on the world. So today we're going to go on a journey. Me, you, and everyone in this room. Because the stories that are present right here, right now, have the power to change the world. Are you ready? Yes. All right, let me figure this out. Okay, my personal journey all started with a Facebook message. You know how when you got into NYU and you added all those people on Facebook, and then you showed up on campus and you had that really awkward moment in the dining hall when, even though you know that they're obsessed with lolcats and you know what they had for dinner last night, you weren't sure whether you should say hi or not? Well, 3 years ago, I got a Facebook message from one of those friends. We'd never met except for an awkward wave in the park, but she wrote to me and she said she'd been following my photos on Facebook for 2 years. She'd seen photos of my big, crazy family. There's 10 of us, and it's as wild as you can imagine. And that's a whole nother storytelling hour right there. She had seen photos from my first trip out of the United States to Nigeria. And she'd even read the blog that I wrote on my 18th birthday when I had my political awakening in front of a field of burning oil. And she'd watched the first video that I ever created after my semester of traveling around the world. And just from the content that I shared, she understood my story. So she wrote to me, and she said that she'd been planning to travel to the occupied Palestinian territories to take photos for an organization there that gives kids a safe space to play. But her parents weren't letting her go, and she wanted to know if I could take her place. So 3 weeks later, I found myself in Nablus in the West Bank. And at first I was completely disoriented, trying to figure out the situation there, trying to figure out what was going on. And then after a couple of days, I started sharing my experience online. And immediately, several members of my family started writing to me. My aunt wrote to me, and she said that I shouldn't trust the kids that I was meeting because they were already terrorists. And I said, how in the world could she look at these kids and think that they're terrorists? I mean, these are the most gorgeous kids I'd ever seen in my life. Look at how awesome this kid is. He has air fresheners on the front of his bike. Like, how do you come to the conclusion that he's a terrorist? And then my uncle wrote to me, and he said that he thought the entire conflict could be solved if Palestinian parents just loved their children more than they hated Israelis. And again, I was confused. I said, how does he know how Palestinian parents feel about their children? But he seemed convinced. And then I posted a blog, and it literally had this girl's face. Look at how gorgeous she is. And this is what the response was. I didn't write a single word in that post, and this is what someone said to me. They said, do the world a favor and gag your typewriter and thoughts before it's too late for you to escape hell. I was completely shocked. I was frozen. I was immobilized. I was terrified. Not for myself, but for the kind of people who could look at these photos and think that I'm trying to do something bad in the world, that I'm a horrible person, that I should be the target of terrorism. And so I stopped sharing the stories that I was hearing. they scared me so much that I silenced myself, and I didn't share the stories of the people that I was meeting. And the first week that I was there, I met these two precious girls, Farida and Fauzia, on the street, and they were playing, and they dragged me into their house, and they dressed me up in hijab, and they fed me lots of food, and we played for hours. And over the course of the next month, I went to their house almost every day, and I came to learn their family story. Just like my family, they have 10 kids, which I loved. And their mother, Faryal, described to me how for many years, Nablus was under a strict curfew, where people literally, and I mean literally, weren't allowed to leave their homes for months on end. They could go, they'd get a few hours to go and get food every couple weeks. And during that period, she told me her oldest son had gotten restless one day. And he needed to go for a walk. He needed to get out of the house. Things were getting tense. People were sick of each other. So he went for a walk. And when he went for a walk, he was shot in the back of the head by an Israeli soldier. And they took his body back to their house. And Farida and Fauzia saw their older brother's dead body. And when that happened, Fauzia stopped speaking. She literally went silent for an entire year. And both her and her sister began having terrible, horrible nightmares that were violent, where everyone in their family was dying, everyone that they knew was dying. And they began to pee their pants uncontrollably, both during the day and at night. And their mother, Faryal, described to me how since the moment her first child was born, she's wanted nothing more than to give them a good life. She's wanted to give them a life where they can know the meaning of secure, where they can go to bed at night without feeling fear. But that everything she's done along the way has prevented her from being able to give her kids that life. So when I came back to the States, it was their story that I wanted to share. It was their story that I wanted people to know. But I was too scared. I didn't want their story to be swept under the rug, under the narrative that everyone believes that Israelis, their oppression is justified because Palestinians are inherently violent. I felt that if I shared their story, it would be diminished or dismissed. And isn't that true for most of us? We have these stories that we need to share, but we're scared that the dominant narrative will erase them, will crush them. So what is the dominant narrative? Dominant narratives are the big societal beliefs that we're taught from the day that we're born that explain how the world is. And dominant narratives are designed to do one thing: to protect the power and privilege of those who have it. So people who push back against that dominant narrative are ostracized. They are intimidated. But it's worth it, and we need to do it. And dominant narratives, they silence us. They make us scared to share our stories. And they convince us that we are too small, we are too weak, we are too uneducated, we are too young to make a difference. They tell us that powerful women are emasculating. They tell us that it's our fault if we're sexually abused. They tell us that Occupy Wall Street is just full of dirty, jobless hippies. They tell us that our sexual orientation is shameful or unnatural. And most importantly, they sustain injustice. They tell us that the poor are lazy, that black men are threatening, that gender is fixed at birth. They tell us that to be an American is to be a white, English-speaking consumer. They tell us that if you have a disability, you have nothing to contribute to the world. So how can we stop these narratives? How can we get rid of them? When I think of the moments in my life when I've been able to confront the dominant narratives that are crushing me, and I think about what helped me to overcome them, there's one thing that all of these experiences have in common. It's a friend, a mentor, or someone I didn't even know sharing a story with me about their life experience overcoming that dominant narrative, their experience making something else happen. So a year ago, as I was facing graduation at NYU and completely terrified, I came up with the conclusion that I should start a company that would give nonprofits videos to help people feel connected to the people that they exist for. And I remember when I came up with this idea, I thought it was like the most brilliant thing I'd ever thought of, because I'd be able to make money and do what I love and make the world a better place. And I remember I was so excited, and I told someone about it, and they said to me, "Oh my gosh, you're so cute and naive." And I was like, man. And they said to me, be sure that when you're meeting with potential clients, don't tell them your age, or else they won't take you seriously. So I remember I went home that night, and I laid on my bed, and I just really thought about it. And I started doubting myself, and I started thinking, am I foolish for thinking this is something I'm capable of? Am I completely stupid? And it was then that I remembered a story that I'd been told. Courtney Spence, whose face is covered up right there, is another 5'3" blonde who started an amazing video organization when she was in college. And I remember a few years ago, she told me how she spent the last 10 years overcoming the diminished expectations projected on her every time she walks in a boardroom because she is a small-framed woman, young woman. And so when I had that story, and I had it in my mind, and I thought, you know what? That's what she was talking about. That's what I'm facing right now, this person who thinks that I'm not capable. And so her story gave me something else to hold on to. It gave me another experience that I could use to decide what to do with my life. So these dominant, and so I'm happy to say that a year later, I'm 22 years old, and my business is doing great. In the past year, we've created 43 videos for 18 organizations. And most importantly, I can't imagine doing what I love more. So if these narratives are so overwhelming and so challenging, how can we confront them? And it's a very exciting time because the old rules are being rewritten. Those in power are losing their monopoly on storytelling. And in many ways, storytelling has been democratized. There are new engines of influence. Just think, every time you share your status, you're sharing part of your story. Every time you share content, you're telling people who you are and what's important to you. So peer-to-peer sharing is how ideas are spread. And even, as Nan says, if it's not influencing behavior, it's at least spreading the idea. So this offers us amazing new opportunities. And because peer-to-peer sharing is how ideas are now spread, top-down, force-fed narratives are being challenged all around the world. And I believe that it's these changes in storytelling which will help us create the kind of world that we want, the kind of world where all people are able to live with the dignity and respect that they deserve. So, how's that going to happen? It's going to happen if we all believe in our stories. If we recognize that our stories are powerful, if we recognize that our stories are important. And you have to do that right here and right now. Because while one story might not have that much power on its own, it's what happens when an individual story sparks others to share their story. That an amazing thing happens. Sharing your story vulnerably, boldly, and honestly is like handing a permission slip to others to do the same. Every movement is started with a story which inspires people to say, I have a similar story, or I hear your story, and I stand in solidarity with you. Just think of the Arab Spring. One individual whose story of the endless frustration of repression and lack of opportunities represented that of so many others. And when this one individual took an action that shared his story with others and inspired others to share their story. And when many people shared their stories, the narrative began to shift. And it began to shift from this is something we must endure to we have the power to change this. And that's the shift in narrative that I want us to have right here, right now. I want us to move from the dominant narratives are so uncontrollable and we have no power over them and there's something we must endure and we must live like this, to we have the power to change this. Because when many people share their stories, that's when the narrative can shift. This is from Occupy Wall Street, and I remember when I saw this, this was the first moment that I actually felt connected to what was happening, and I actually realized that the dominant narrative that this was just, idealistic, jobless hippies wasn't true. I saw that it was representative of so many other people. And when people publicly challenge the dominant narrative, that's when it can change. We live in a world where we are increasingly isolated and connected at the same time. Oftentimes, I feel like I'm in the midst of a battlefield with too many tabs, screens, blogs, and feeds fighting for my attention all the time. And what I've realized is that I have power over the stories that I fill my life with. And in the sea of cacophony, I can choose to enjoy my siloed communities, my homophily communities, or I can do what's really challenging. And that's what I want to challenge you to do right now, to reach out and to listen and connect with those whose stories, perspectives, and backgrounds are different from yours. So 3 weeks ago, as I was preparing for this talk and I was forming these words, I realized that this was something that I had to do myself too. I had to go into the forbidden, scary land of talking politics with family. It was time to talk to my uncle about Palestine. Because you see, a month ago, my partner Ethan and I had the opportunity to travel back to the Palestinian territories to lead a video workshop for activists there and teach them how to create powerful videos. And when I was there, I realized this time I can't stay silent. I don't want to stay silent. I don't want to let the dominant narrative silence me anymore. So when I came back, I met with my uncle for dinner. We sat down and I poured out every story that I could. And I told him about Frida and Fauzia and how wonderful it felt to see them again a few years later. Look at Frida now has her teeth. And how great it felt to hold them and kiss them and know that they were safe and that nothing had happened to them. I told him about Ziad Jalani, a father of 3 who got in a 5-mile-per-hour car accident and then was shot 3 times in the head by a member of the border police who told the media that this was a terrorist who crashed to try and kill people. This same member of the border police said on Facebook that his favorite food was Arabs and that he was looking for an opportunity to kill them. But no investigation was done, no charges were pressed, and this man is still walking free. I told him about his wife, Moira, who told me how sometimes when she's doing the dishes and someone comes up the stairs and she thinks that it's him and she has to realize over and over again that he's gone. I told him about Manal, who organizes weekly nonviolent protests against occupation. In her life, she's lost 18 members of her family, all killed by the Israeli army. I told him how she said to me how we can't even grieve one death before we have to grieve the next, and that we hope that someday we will see the sun of freedom, but we don't know when that will happen. And every huge moment of pain we feel, we try to minimize as small as we can. And every small moment of happiness, we try to expand as large as we can. And I told him how Manal and her husband had wanted to take their kids to the sea. And even though they live 15 minutes away from the sea in Tel Aviv, they're not allowed access to it. So they saved up for 2 years, and they took their kids all the way to Jordan, a 2-day journey that cost them a couple $1,000s, because they wanted their kids to be able to feel the water and feel that joy. And I told him how she told me that when her kids, how happy it made her when she saw her kids run into the sea, feel the water, the complete joy and ecstasy and freedom of that moment that they felt. And how her youngest son had screamed out, "It's so salty," because he had tried to drink it. And when I told that story, I saw my uncle's face start to change, because he lives 1 block away from the ocean. And so we poured out all the stories that we could, and then I just sat there in silence, and he sat there in silence, and I felt like everything that I believe in was hanging in that moment. And then slowly and cautiously, he said to me, "You know, you're right. People don't deserve to live like that. They deserve their rights. Occupation must end. I didn't see myself in them before, and now I do." And he said, "These stories need to be shared." So everyone, right here, right now, think about the story that you're scared to share. I know how it feels. Trust me, talking to my uncle was one of the scariest things I've ever done in my life. But I want to tell you that you can do it. and that you have to believe that it's so important for you to share those stories. Because if we don't share those stories, we're going to live in a world where the injustice and the horrors that are perpetrated on people will continue to exist. And if we share our stories, an amazing thing can happen. Because personal stories tap into the web that connects us. They remind us of our common humanity. So if we're going to change our collective consciousness, it's a huge task. But it starts one individual at a time, one story at a time. Thank you.